Hauser.
And I'm Sam Teets.
Thank you guys for tuning in as we go into the world of the NFL draft. Once again, here we go. It's the NFL draft show, guys. We're going to talk edge rushers this week. We spent a lot of time talking quarterbacks. We did a mock draft last week. We'll probably do another mock draft next week or maybe the week after the scouting combine. We'll see how things go. But we haven't given much love to the edge rushers. We haven't given much love to the defensive side of the ball. So that's what we're going to do tonight. All right, and we're going to just go over the position in general, maybe do little rankings later on. But where do you lie overall on this edge rushing class?
I think this edge rushing class is the deepest class we've seen from this position in a long time. And I think it's probably the deepest position overall this entire draft. It's loaded at the front, too. It's not just a deep class. It's got a lot of guys who are going to go in the first round. And it's becoming more and more common to see 4, 5, sometimes even 6 edge rushers go in the first round now. And even if you miss that one of those guys, you still have an opportunity to get one in top of the third, middle of the second round, who's still going to be a very good player and probably start for you from day one. So in my opinion, this edge class is one of the best, maybe the best in the past 10 years, obviously excluding maybe the 2011 class. I think it had J.J. Watt, Justin Houston, Ryan Kerrigan, all those guys.
Wow, that's quite the statement, considering this class doesn't have what you would consider a quote unquote generational type prospect at edge rusher. There's no Myles Garrett, there is no Von Miller, there is no J.J. Watt. There's none of those kinds of guys in this class yet. You think the depth is good enough? You think there's enough difference makers at the position that the best in the last 10 years? Besides, obviously, what you mentioned, that's bold, man.
I think we could see 17 year one starters at the edge group come out of this class.
17
starters. Or guys who will make at least 10 starts. I think there's at least 17 guys who will make 10 starts in this class. And you could push it depending on how you classify an edge rusher. If you want to see someone like Zachary Carter play edge in a 3-4 scheme, I don't know. You can push the number a little bit, but I think 17, 16, somewhere in that range, you're going to see that many starters at the edge spot from this class.
Wow. All right. So how many edge rushers do you have on your big board in your top 100?
So looking at the big board that I had before the Senior Bowl, because I still have to make another one for the post-Senior Bowl, and I might just wait until after the Combine at this point. But I had 18, counting Zachary Carter as a 3-4 defensive end. Now, he played a lot of defensive tackle at the Senior Bowl, and I didn't love him at that spot, I'll be honest. I think he'd probably be a bit more beneficial if for him to play as like a 3-4 defensive end instead of a true defensive tackle type role. But yeah, I had 18 countering Zachary Carter. And looking at the guys below him, someone like Alex Wright from UAB, who's highly underrated, I had him at 124. Tyreek Smith from Ohio State, I thought actually had a pretty good Senior Bowl run. He might move up into the top 100 in my next edition. I had him at 125. And somebody, even D'Angelo Malone, I had at 141 out of Western Kentucky, also had a very good Senior Bowl. I think you'll start seeing some of these names rise up the board a little bit. I think that can make a huge difference in terms of who you get in. Even someone like Jesse Lakuta, I believe I say his last name, out of Penn State, was listed more as a linebacker coming in, but played edge at the Senior Bowl, and he really popped. Him and Boye Mafe were two of the guys who were consistently getting in and getting sacks during the actual game itself during Senior Bowl week. I didn't have him in the top 150, I think. I have him at 185. That's obviously going to change quite a bit. So there's a lot of players that could flex into the top 100. But as of right now, I think I said, 18 names were in the top 100 the last time I had a big board.
Now, 17 first-year starters getting at least 10 starts on the edge, 18 in your top 100 isn't too far-fetched. I currently have 13 edge rushers in my top 100. I do count Zachary Carter as an edge rusher as well. I actually classified Alex Wright as from UAB as a defensive lineman, but either way, doesn't really matter. We're splitting hairs here. So 17, 18 isn't that crazy of a number. But let's go more towards the back end of that number, because we can talk about the front end all day. We can talk about the Hutchinsons and the Kayvon Thibodeaux and all that. But I'm more curious about the back end of your rankings when it comes to these edge rushers. What are some names that you might consider mid-round picks that you might hear that you consider in that top 17, top 18?
Yeah, we're talking about a mid round kind of guy. I think someone who was hyper productive this past year, like a Sam Williams from Ole Miss, will probably end up playing more of I'm going to say outside linebacker role. He's not going to have a hand in the dirt full time, I believe. But coming out of Ole Miss, a highly productive player this past year. He's about 265 pounds ish, around 6'4". And he has a pretty good streak going on. He had 6 sacks in 2019, 4 in 2020, and 12 and a half this past year, along with 4 forced fumbles. So obviously a breakout year that really set himself apart from different parts of this group. And like I said, I don't view him as a true defensive end type guy. When I watch him, he doesn't have that power per se. I'll be curious to see how his anchor holds up against the run in certain situations like that. But I still view this guy as someone who could sneak in, maybe not be one of those guys who is a starter necessarily right away, but I think he's going to be a guy who's going to get a lot of rotational snaps and probably play somewhere between 500 to 650 snaps this year and be one of those impact players who can go in and make a real impact for your team. Because this past year in college football, 61 total pressures. That's a high number for him on 451 pass rushing snaps. I think as long as you get him on the field, allow him to get into the rhythm, he'll be an impact player.
Yeah, you know what? It's actually funny you mentioned Sam Williams because he's actually someone who's on my board right on the outside of my top 100, but he's right there. He's in the conversation with Zachary Carter, with Michael Clemens from Texas A&M, with Nick Benito, the edge rusher from Oklahoma. Who is from the back end? Let's work our way more towards the front. Giggity. Who is your top edge rusher right now?
My top edge rusher overall is Aiden Hutchinson. It's not obviously a huge gap between him and Kayvon Thibodeau. Aiden Hutchinson is my top prospect on my past big board. He was number 1 overall, and Thibodeau was number 3. So it's not a big gap between these guys. But I think everyone clearly recognizes Thibodeau has the raw potential, all the athleticism in the world. He's bendy, he's fast, he's going to make a lot of plays in pursuit. He's got a lot of speed, but he has to develop some polished pass rushing moves and a polished plan. Versus Aiden Hutchinson, who I watch, who I think has the power already. It's going to be impactful in the running game as well. He doesn't have the pursuit that Kayvon Thibodeau does because he doesn't have the raw burst per se or the straight line speed, but he's still an impactful player. I think he's bendier than people expect. I think he's going to do great in the cone drills, I believe, at the combine. And I think that will change a lot of opinions on him. They'll start viewing him more as an athlete than just this hard working, polished pass rusher who has some good hand moves, who can win the inside shoulder and the outside shoulder. So I think there's going to be a changing opinion on Hutchinson that's going to motivate him even more to be the top overall pick. And that's why I have him number 1. I think right now he's the more finished product than Kayvon Thibodeau.
Where would you compare Hutchinson compared to previous edge rushers in previous classes? We know he's not at the Bosa level. We know he's not at the Garrett level, but where does he fall?
I think in the past he could have been someone who'd fall right around the edge of the top 10.
Okay.
I know that's not saying much inspiring stuff about this draft class, I'll be honest. But hey, I had, I think, 4 blue chip prospects in this year's class, and last year I think I had double-digit ones considering all the QBs and all the players in that. So this group it's very different compared to last year. I'll just say that. Although looking at this past draft, when we're talking about edge rushers, I think he might be he'd definitely be the top edge rusher in this past draft class for sure. Not counting Micah Parsons as an edge rusher, obviously. He went into the draft process classified as a linebacker, and he came out an all-pro caliber pass rusher. But this past year, I think I would classify Hutchinson by far as the best edge rusher if we're talking about the 2021 group, because there just wasn't anybody who really stood out, and clearly no one went that high. If we go back and we're talking about 2020, there's Chase Young, obviously, and Chase Young is definitely ahead of Hutchinson as far as prospects go. But again, I still think he probably would have been a top 10 pick in that draft class. C.J. Henderson and Jedrick Willis Jr. are the bottom guys in the top 10 of that group. I think you can definitely slot Hutchinson somewhere in that range as well. And looking at the other pass rushers from that class, it's not a great group per se. So I think even though he's not this superstar level guy, he's by far would have been the second best pass rusher in 2020. He would have been the top pass rusher in 2021. Mm-hmm. You can go back one more year, look at 2019. Nick Bosa is top on the board, but then the Cleveland Furl comes off at number 4 overall. And if you're asking me who's the better prospect between Aiden Hutchinson and Cleveland Furl, it's Aiden Hutchinson. So I just think there's a gap there. I would probably view him as a better prospect than Josh Allen, who went 7th overall in 2020. I remember him coming out of Kentucky.
I
So
love Josh
he's
Allen
not.
coming out, man.
You
Love
loved
Josh.
him.
Loved him.
He's starting to do a really. Tell you what, if you pair Aiden Hutchinson with Josh Allen this year, I think they'll both get much better. They'll
Yeah,
both
man.
be really good. So that just gives you a perspective of where I view him. I think this guy would have been a top 10 pick regardless of what class he's in, but obviously not on the same level as, like you said, Nick Bosa, Chase Young, that kind of player.
All right, now before we go on, I want to sprinkle some love out there for betting.net. It is your top sportsbook comparison site. Betting.net offers extensive reviews on the best sportsbooks out there. So head on over to betting.net. Now, we're talking about edge rushers in this episode, and one guy that I do want to discuss, another one of the top edge rushers in this class, and on most boards, a top 10, top 15 overall prospect, is George Karlaftis. Karlaftis. I'm terrible with these last names. I gotta be
Don't
better.
worry, so am I. I'm on the same boat as you.
I gotta be better. It's always been a weakness. But anyway, so the edge rusher from Purdue, and like I said, on most boards, I have a consensus board. He's pretty much top 10, top 15, almost across the board for the most part. But I saw a tweet recently that gave me some pause, made me think and made me wonder. And it was a tweet regarding Karlaftis and how the media is overhyping him more than teams might be liking him. And it confused me, but the tweet went on to say something about his lack of elite twitch and more of a strength than a speed guy. And I thought it was nitpicking. And I mean, everyone's going to have different boards. That's one of the things that's so great about the draft is that there are no two big boards that are going to be the same, no two mock drafts that are going to be the exact same. They're all going to be different, and they're all these the analysis on these players, all everything that goes on. It's all going to be different. So that's one of the great things about the NFL draft. But some takes, like in my opinion, this one seem to be reaching a bit. Do you think there's anything to that tweet? Do you think it's more media hype for a guy like Karlaftis? Do you think the lack of elite twitch or something like that would really lower him on the boards of NFL teams?
Well, I've been a Karlaftis defender from the start. I do view this guy as at least a top 15 pick in terms of his play. I've seen more mock drafts recently where he's fallen into the late teens, sometimes even to early 20s. And the reason why this is happening is I believe people are going back and they're looking at some of the other edge rushers in this class. It's not necessarily a knock against Karlaftis, but he's looking at what are some of the other edge rushers in this group do well. You know, Jermaine Johnson is the hot name on the block who just came off a dominant Senior Bowl where we saw him basically do everything well. So he's moving up board. Some people are having him being a borderline top 10 guy now. Travon Walker from Georgia is getting a lot of love. I think Dan Brugler, I believe from the Athletic, had him like number 6 overall in his big board or something like that. Like ridiculously high. But I watched Travon Walker. He doesn't have a pass rushing play. He doesn't have any pass rushing moves, but he is, for his size, he moves insanely well. Like he's quick, legitimately quicker than some linebackers on the teams he's playing against. Like Travon Walker has incredible speed, incredible burst, all the athleticism in the world. And he's incredibly raw, but because he has all that athleticism and burst, people watch him, people watch David Ojabo, these kind of raw players with this bundles of athleticism, twitch, and explosiveness, and then they watch Karlaftis and say, well, this guy's not that at all. And it's not that Karlaftis doesn't have that explosiveness, he doesn't have the ability to get to the quarterback, it's just that he's a different type of player than David Ojabo, than Travon Walker, than Drake Jackson out of USC, or Arnold Ebiketie. He's not going to be that kind of guy. And that's not a bad thing. He plays a different position. He plays a little bit differently than those players. He's closer to 275, 280 than those guys. He's got 10, 15 pounds on them. He's definitely built more muscular on them, too. He's going to hold it well against the run. He's going to be able to anchor the edge, something David Ojabo right now cannot do. David Ojabo gets swept away a lot in the running game. So I think it's less a knock on Ojabo, less of a lock on Karlaftis, and more people watching these other guys and then changing their opinions on what they view to be the preferred edge rusher in this class, as opposed to considering, well, there's other types of edge rushers out there other than these just freaky athletic guys who are going to test and be the top 10th percentile or 90th percentile in all these different combine drills.
See, I'm glad that you brought up Travon Walker, because he's a guy who – now here's a guy – sorry, having a Chris Collinsworth moment again. But he's a player who when I'm doing my big board and I'm looking at my notes, I look at him and then I look at players similar to him, at least athletically. And I always find it weird during the draft process when one, in this situation where one guy's athleticism is like held against him and another guy's athleticism is used to boost him as the process goes on. And I mean that comparing a guy like Travon Walker to Thibodeau, for example, who we know the kind of athlete that Thibodeau is. But I feel like the draft process is a long one, and it gets to the point where people start nitpicking. And I've seen, reports and whatnot that he's, super athletic, but he doesn't have this bend, or he doesn't have that super explosive first step. He's not the quickest first step on the. But then you look at this guy, and it's, oh man, he's so explosive, and he's got great get off, and the lateral movement, and he can good this and that, and it's like, well, yeah, Walker's a good prospect, and I like him, but as you said, he lacks in pass rushing moves, he lacks in counter moves, and there's things that need to be worked on there. I don't think it'll prevent him from being a first round pick potentially. I think Walker's a really talented guy, and I think in the right defensive system, he could flourish. But I just always find it weird when we get to February, March or so. Hell, even April. April's going to get crazy with all the rumors we're getting and stuff. I always find it weird how that happens.
Yeah, and I think the explanation, or at least the easy explanation for that, is it's kind of like a prospect fatigue process. We've been talking about Kayvon Thibodeau for 12 months, 15 months at this point. And it's kind of what happened to Penei Sewell to some extent last year, where Penei Sewell was like the hot thing, and he didn't play. He sat out a year, so there's a little extra layer to that. But people keep talking about how great Penei Sewell is, and they got to the point where people were like, well, is he really that good? The guy who is like an 18-year-old, won the Outland like the Outland trophy and all stuff. He's like, is he really that good? I don't know. And Jamar Chase as well. It's just kind of like a situation where you get a little overwhelmed, a little tired of watching the guy, and then it's like, oh, the new shiny thing came out, and you follow Travon Walker is the new shiny thing, Jermaine Johnson is the new shiny thing, and people get distracted by it, and they kind of overlook these guys like Hutchinson and Thibodeau, who we know are really good players, and they're going to go in the top 5 selections, but people are just at a point where they're trying to get someone new on the board. They're trying to be the guys to discover and promote these new players. So I think a little bit of it is prospect fatigue, and that's something you have to fight against when you're analyzing these guys.
We're going to keep going, but I do want to take a quick moment to remind you guys that betting.net offers expert and user reviews for every online sportsbook and casino in your state. So find the best place to bet for you. Head on over to betting.net. Now, back to the edge rushers. Drake Jackson. Let's talk about Drake Jackson for a hot second, because he's one of those players in this class that had a lot of love going into the year, had a lot of love throughout the year, mostly considered a potential first-round pick. But I feel like he's one of those guys who's kind of faded away. Drake Jackson, Cameron Thomas, very popular names you'd see at the back end of a first round of a mock draft. I mean, hell, I had Drake Jackson at the back end of my first mock draft a couple of months ago. So it's weird. There's not really much talk about these guys, the Myjai Sanders, the Cam Thomas, the Drake Jacksons. Why do you think that is at this point? Do you think it's these other guys who are just doing better and getting talked about more, or what?
Well, one of the things I think why these guys have faded away is because people like David Ojabo, Arnold Ebiketie, Jermaine Johnson, Travon Walker, we mentioned, these guys have kind of risen from nowhere to become impact guys. Someone like Josh Pascal from Kentucky as well. Boye Mafe, people had eyes on, but some people are really just getting introduced to him because of the Senior Bowl. Those names are kind of pushing these other guys we've known about for a whole year down the board a little bit. I still think Myjai Sanders is a really good player. After watching him for the first couple of weeks of the season, I kind of decided Myjai Sanders was going to be a second-round kind of guy for me for the most part. And I'm still at that point with him. I still view him as a solid top 50 pick So I haven't really moved very far on him. I still kind of view Kingsley and Agbury as a solid second round pick. Drake Jackson I have in that range as well. And I don't really know why he in particular has suffered so much. I know Cameron Thomas has dropped off a little bit because he got hurt when he was at the Senior Bowl. Wasn't able to actually play a little bit. And that kind of it's not his fault, obviously, but because you got to see guys like Jermaine Johnson, Arnold Ebiketie, Jesse Lakuta play and do really well, you sort of forget about him a little bit. But Drake Jackson, I think, late season injury, maybe that's why. But I still view him as a very good player. I know there's some people in the scouting community who still like him quite a bit. Someone like Matt Miller, who works for ESPN right now, is a huge fan of Drake Jackson. I think part of it's because he's really athletic. Mm-hmm. He's about 250 right now, from what I understand, 250 pounds, about 6'4", very bendy. He has all the athleticism you could want and could probably play a few positions because of his size. Now, does he have to develop a pass rush plan? Yes, he's one of those guys who has to develop his plan a little bit more, and maybe you want to see him show a little bit more of a stouter presence against the run. Mm-hmm. However, I still view this guy as a top 50 pick as well, and I don't think he's going to fall off in that conversation. One of the reasons why I guess he fell off, he's not playing for a team that was very good in USC. Mm-hmm. He got hurt down the stretch, so he didn't finish out the year. And then you haven't seen him yet. Like, we have to wait. If he shows up at the scouting combine and he runs all those athletic drills and he does as well as we believe he will, he'll be right back in that conversation all over again. But we have not seen him in a while. I think it's, again, one of the reasons why we're probably not talking about him so much. We've seen all these other guys perform more recently. Majay Sanders beating up Alabama in the college football playoff. Jermaine Johnson, Arnold Ebiketie, and all those guys I mentioned before at the Senior Bowl. Mm-hmm. Some guys at the Shrine Bowl. It just ends up bearing him down the board a little bit, especially when you have all these great edge rushers in this class.
I think there's a team that's really going to benefit from that too. I think Drake Jackson is one of the guys, at least at the edge position, that I'm looking forward to watching at the combine. I'm not sure what he's going to be doing and whatnot, but I want to see what he tests. If whatever he does, I want to see the feet. I want to see the speed. I want to see the athleticism, because his tape is nice, and I can see why there's still love, like you mentioned, Matt Miller and other analysts out there, why they still like him. I still like him. I still have him as a top 50 as well. In fact, he's 45th on my big board right now. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if he goes out there, blows up at the combine, and ends up being a first-round pick, because he's got that physical talent. And that's something we're going to talk about a lot, I think, with this edge class and with this defensive class in particular. There's a lot of athleticism, a lot of speed, a lot of sideline to sideline playmaking. A lot of measurables are there for a lot of these players. And you did mention something earlier at the beginning of the show about how rare of a class you think this is in terms of the overall depth and talent. You don't think it's too top heavy. It may not have one of those elite edge rushers, but it's a deep squad. I mean, you said you got 17, 18 guys, edge rushers in your top 100, which is, that's pretty much 20% of your top 100 is edge rushers, which is that's a lot. And I know everybody's looking for edge rush help, so this is going to be a nice draft for a lot of teams.
Yeah, and even getting into the later rounds, there's going to be guys down there. Someone like Christopher Allen from Alabama, who got hurt this past year, like in week 1, so we didn't get to see a lot of him. He's going to be an outside linebacker. He's going to be an impact player at the NFL level. He looked really good in some of the limited times we've seen him. Ali Fayed from Central Michigan he's one of those, I think, 5-year players. I'm pretty sure he played 5 years at a small school, put up like historic level numbers at a smaller school. Not going to be a starter in the NFL, but he's going to be a rotational guy who's going to help make an impact immediately. There's a bunch of guys coming out of Texas A&M this year. I think you mentioned Michael Clemens already. There's a lot of guys from Texas A&M who might not be day 2 picks, but they could end up on day 3 and be really good players. Clemens is someone who could be a day 2 kind of guy, even though there was an arrest. He got arrested, I believe, in August, which might be a bit of a red flag for some teams. But there are guys down the board. I mean, there's someone, Deshaun Dixon from Norfolk State. There are guys down this board who are going to be impact players. Dominique Robinson from Miami of Ohio. Deontay Knight from the University of Western Ontario and their players. Trey Williams from Arkansas. There's a lot of guys who are going to be going out on day 3 and are going to be good players, and they're going to find roles in the NFL. And they're going to stick, which is why this draft class is so good, is you can find not starters, obviously, but you can find as many talented players on day 3 as you can find on day 2 as you can find on day 1.
No, this is why people need to watch this show. Digging deep. We're pulling out names, all right? Third day names. Amari Barno and Nick Figueroa and oh my god, just this is something special. D'Angelo Malone.
And there's gonna be some veteran guys too. There's gonna be guys like Zach von Valkenburg from Iowa, guys who are not going to have the athletic traits per se to go and play immediately in the NFL, but guys who are solid producers at their school, at their respective programs, who have some size. Jacob, oh boy, this is a hard last name. Panasiuk from Michigan State. I think he's leading pressure from their team, leading sackers from the team as well. Those guys, they're not going to get great looks because they're not uber athletic, but they're solid players, and I'm telling you, they can make an impact in the NFL level because they have the experience and because they do have some more of the polished aspects of their game, and they have the size to hold down the edge as well. So I think those players are all going to be good, and you're going to have guys like a Zach McCloud from Miami who's going to be intriguing because he played linebacker for a while, and then he ends up coming to the NFL as an edge rusher. Big Cat Bryant out of UCF is finally coming out of college and somehow ending up in the NFL draft after being in college for what feels like 10 years. Someone like Kyron Johnson from Kansas, Cameron Good from Cal, Ryder Anderson from Indiana. There's a whole bunch of different kind of guys in this draft class, and they all have different bodies, different makes, different skill sets. You can kind of pick whichever one you want to custom fit your defense.
Now, as we wrap things up, I think on this episode, because we've gone pretty deep. We've gone pretty deep on this defensive, this edge rushing class. All right, it's getting crazy. But as we're wrapping things up, I do want to, again, sprinkle some love out there for betting.net. It finds the best promotions, offers, and bonus codes, so you don't have to head over to their website now to take advantage of things like free bets and matching deposits, betting.net. So this NFL Scouting Combine is next week. They lifted whatever crazy restrictions they had. There's not going to be a sort of bubble for the players. It's going to be more or less normal. There was no combine last year. There was no face-to-face meetings last year because of COVID. So this year's combine, there's no fans or anything like that, and media access is limited, but it's pretty much back to normal. So with that in mind, and half the field not holding out because of these crazy restrictions they had, give me the name of one or two edge rushers that you're going to want to be keeping an eye on next week to see who could boost their stock, or see how they're going to test and see if it'll tank their stock.
Well, we talked about a bunch of guys who are really going to be impact players, but I think look at someone like a DeMarvin Leal, who I think is going to be more and more viewed as an edge rusher than an interior defensive lineman. I know there's some thoughts that maybe in some schemes he will be an interior guy, but I look at Leal and I think he's been really, like, talking about guys falling off on draft boards and falling off on big boards. This guy's been knocked pretty hard recently.
He has.
And this is an opportunity for him to come out and say, hey, I'm still here. I'm still an impact player. And I think there's been some knocks against his arm length potentially, which again is something he can control. He can control, though, is how he goes out there and performs, the footwork, the speed, some of the other measurables, and how he does in interviews. Someone like DeMarvin Leal has a lot to gain and a lot to lose in this scenario because he's a guy who's been forgotten, quite frankly, so far. So I look at him. I think he's a player who can really help himself out. I already mentioned Jesse Luketa earlier from Penn State. They played him as a bit of like a linebacker edge hybrid. He doesn't have a ton of pure pass rushing snaps, but you saw what he was able to do at the Senior Bowl, both in practices and during the actual game. I want to know just how fast he is and how quickly he gets off the line of scrimmage. I want to watch him because I think he really has the raw athletic potential, not on the same level as Odafe, Jason Owe, not the same kind of guys like that. But if you want to go a tier down, maybe. I think we can look at that because he might actually be the better Penn State edge rusher when it comes down to it, as crazy as that sounds. So I want to see because, again, we don't have a ton of tape of him playing as a pure pass rusher. But
right,
if we look at and see the measurables are good and look what he did at the Senior Bowl, I think maybe you can start thinking about long-term, maybe as a 2-year project, this guy could go out and be a really impactful player. And then one more player, Josh Pascal from Kentucky. He's been a little bit somewhat forgotten in recent weeks, I'll say. But Pascal is a player who, prior to the Senior Bowl, was rising into that top 50 conversation in terms of overall players, and someone that was viewed as a solid day 2 pick. Probably as a second-round kind of guy. I think Pascal has a lot to gain as well because there are so many of these guys who, again, are rising up towards the first round. And if you're not getting talked about, someone like Pascal's not getting mentioned very much. So he's kind of stayed dead even. And eventually that means you're losing ground because all these guys are going up. So I think he coming out here and kind of putting his name back in front of people, putting on a good showing, will really help his stock and keep him either solidified as a second-round pick or maybe even moving towards the back end of the first round.
Nice. All right. So actually, before I mention my guys, you mentioned DeMarvin Leal, and I consider him more of a defensive line prospect, mostly based on his body type and the kind of game he plays. But I wanted to say when it comes to Leal, he's one of those guys where elite athlete, okay? It stands out. When he wants to, he uses his size, he uses his speed, he uses his leverage, and he takes advantage of it. He's got good balance. There's a lot to like on tape. But it's just inconsistent, and he can get blown up, and it's ugly. And you don't see, like you were talking about with some of these other guys, you don't see an edge rushing plan. You don't see him properly, at least consistently enough, properly using his hands, using his leverage, using different moves. It's there. You see it, but it's not consistent enough. And I think that's what's the biggest knock right now is, well, A, you don't know if is he going to be a defensive lineman and a D tackle in a 4-3 front? Is he going to be a D end in a 3-4 front? Can he play the edge in a 4-3? You know, there's questions to that end because he's not a pure player one way or the other. If he's pushing 300 pounds, that looks more like a D tackle than it does an edge rusher.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We have the same situation in basketball sometimes where you have a guy who's a tweener. A cross usually between a power forward and a center. He's too small to be a true center. He doesn't have the skill set and the athleticism to be a power forward. I think Leal's kind of suffering from the same thing here, where he's got the size to be maybe a defensive tackle, but he has maybe some of the more traits that are better suited to have him a little bit on the outside, facing more against tackles, or maybe cutting like lined up over the tackle, not necessarily outside of one. And it's just a unique combination that's kind of going to negatively affect a very good player because he is a very good player. And people are feeling very comfortable about him being maybe a top 10 pick earlier in the season based on what he did primarily in 2020. And then 2021 was so up and down that now it's kind of people don't know where to put him.
It's not an exact science, this whole scouting thing.
No, it's not.
It's very much the eye of the beholder. I don't know. We'll see. The NFL draft will sort things. NFL scouting combine will sort things out, and we'll see what goes on as the off season goes on. But I think we're pretty much done here, more or less. I do want to mention a couple of guys that I'm keeping an eye on for the scouting combine on the edge. I want to see Arnold Ebiketie, the edge rusher from Penn State. If all the reports are true and this guy goes out there and runs, a 4-4 or something crazy, you want to talk about Jermaine Johnson shooting up draft boards? That kid's going to be a top 20 pick if he does something crazy like that and just blows up the workouts. I want to see him, and I want to see Cam Thomas. I don't even know if he's actually healthy. I know he missed the Senior Bowl because of an injury. So I don't even know if Cam Thomas is going to participate in the scouting combine, but I'd like to see what's going on with him because he's another player, San Diego State edge rusher, who was a name who could potentially have been a late first-round pick. He had a good season. He was dominant, at least statistically, and the tape is solid. But he's just another one of those guys that have fallen off a bit, and no one's really talking about him these days. Even Boye Mafe. There you go. The edge rusher from Minnesota. He's getting a lot of love, and even a guy like him is going ahead of Cam Thomas, is being spoken about more than Cam Thomas now. So I want to see what these two guys can do. One can boost his stock. The other one has nowhere to go but up. Cam Thomas can't drop any further. Do you have anything left you want to mention about the edge rushers before we call it?
No, I think we got mostly everything. We talked about pretty much all the big names and all the guys that I view as being really happy. The only guy I think we might have one player is going to be very controversial in this class is going to be Nick Benito. I'll just mention that one time. He's small. He doesn't have the strength to really play on the edge at the level you would expect. But the production this past year was, my God, like ridiculous level. His win rate is one of the highest in the nation by far, like up there with guys like Hutchinson and those kind of players. So it's going to be a very interesting situation. I actually want to see what he weighs in, if he's at the combine or not, just because, again, production, insane. The body type translating to the NFL, it's kind of up in the air. So that's someone I want to see. I want to see as much of him as possible because, again, production is the level of a top 10 edge rusher in a lot of drafts. And the size is just kind of, it's tough to get over.
All right. So with that in mind, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. And I hope you guys catch up with us next week. We'll be talking more scouting combine focused stuff. It starts March 1st, I believe, is when measurements and everything starts with tight ends. And I think quarterbacks, running backs are going to be getting measured first. So that's going to be exciting. Give us a follow. We're on Instagram. We are on Twitter. Sam, what is your handle?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Sam_Teets33. And you check out my pinned tweet to go ahead and check out my newsletter and see all my latest updates on NFL, NBA, and draft content.
Perfect. And I am DB Talking Sports. D as in Dan, B as in Bob. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. Give us a follow. Give us a like. Share. We'll follow you back. And before tuning out, I just want to remind you guys that betting.net is not just sports betting. So betting.net compares the best online sportsbook. So sit back, relax, and play the top online slots, poker, and table games over at betting.net. For Sam Teets, I'm Dan Kornhauser. Thank you guys for tuning in.